A culture for evidence-informed decision-making in Uganda, and our panelists are already here. It is a fireside session, so the audience will participate, but mostly it's going to be a conversation. In our African culture, as you heard from Adeline, I think yesterday, mentioned something about it, about her grandmother, putting them around the fireplace to tell conversations. So we're going to have a conversation between practitioners in government and also an evidence intermediary, talking about how they've tried to foster a culture of evidence-informed decision-making. Please welcome our panelists and our moderator. I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Dr. Kasilie Ibrahim from the APRSC at Makerere University. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to welcome you to session 7 of this conference. At this juncture, I wish to invite our panelists. First, Mr. Vincent Tumusime, who is the Director of Socioeconomic Monitoring and Research at the Office of the President. Then Madame Josephine Watera, who is the Assistant Director of Research Services at the Parliament of Uganda. And then finally, Mr. Edward Kayongo from ECAS. I will briefly introduce them. The first panelist, Mr. Vincent Tumusime, is working for the Office of the President as the Director of Socioeconomic Monitoring, and is in charge of a very unique institution or secretariat called the Secretariat for Public Policy Execution Oversight Forum, codenamed the Apex Platform. So he will be talking to us regarding that this morning. Madame Josephine Watera is the Assistant Director in the Department of Research Services in the Parliament of Uganda. She's worked there for a considerable duration. She's also a member of the Uganda Evaluation Association, and parts of which she will talk about this morning. And then we have from our very own Edward Kayongo, who will be talking about evidence intermediaries. To kickstart us off, we all know, as was indicated in some of the sessions yesterday, that evidence-informed decision-making is important, partly because in a number of African countries, decisions are not guided by evidence, but in some instances are guided by political factors, and political factors change quite dramatically from time to time. Nonetheless, quite a lot of people are left out if decisions are not guided by evidence, and some of the people left out are the most vulnerable. So this morning, we have a session that's going to look at how specifically government institutions use evidence and how the non-government institutions, evidence intermediaries, also use the various strategies and capacities to promote evidence use. I will start with Mr. Vincent Tumusime. In 3 minutes, could you explain to us how the Apex platform is used to guide evidence decision-making within the Office of the President, as well as the wider government policies and programs? Thank you. You will need to use your mic, please.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, participants. I've already been introduced, and I've been given 3 minutes to explain what I do in the Office of the President, specifically through the Apex platform. Apex platform, as the moderator has already indicated, is a high-level public policy management forum. And it's one of the key reforms that was introduced in NDP 3 for effective implementation of government policies. So what we do is we try in as much as possible to gather information from various stakeholders, including the beneficiaries and institutions that have been implementing, say, policy or program or project. And over a period of time, say 5 years and above. So what we do, we try to trace how that policy has been effective or ineffective, and try to identify what has been achieved and what has not been achieved by gathering information through primary data, secondary data, and then also doing a thesis of various reports that other key stakeholders come up together, right from the implementing institutions, the civil society, the independent researchers, and even just press, world views, and then we gather them together with insights. We come up with reports which we subject to validation by various stakeholders. Then we present them to what we call a pre-apex, where we bring all key stakeholders to come and validate the kind of information that we have come up with. And then we use what we have come up with to make actionable recommendations, which are then subjected to another panel called the steering committee, chaired by the head of public service. And then from there, we come up with concrete recommendations that we think could change policy or influence policy. And then we take them to cabinet, and cabinet pronounces itself on either policy reviews or dropping policies or advocating for new policies. Basically, that's all we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tumusime, for that brief about Apex. I'll come back to you. Josephine, from the vantage point of the Parliament of Uganda, as well as your other engagement with the Uganda Economic Association, could you please, in 3 minutes as well, explain the extent to which the Parliament of Uganda is guided by evidence-informed decision-making?
Thank you very much, and good morning. Parliament has different structures that facilitate the generation, translation, and use of evidence processes. So besides the research department that I'm going to talk about a bit more, there is also the Parliamentary Budget Office that gives evidence that relates to the national budget and its expenditure. There is the Office of the Legal Department that provides legal kind of evidence, because we also go with evidence-based legislation processes. And then there is the Leader of Opposition's Office and Leader of Government Business. By the way they sound, they produce evidence that is biased to those offices that they're in. The Research Department will be celebrating 25 years next year, and we offer independent advice and evidence-based information to committees and individual members of Parliament in form of policy briefs, in forms of position papers, in forms of field-based reports. So we undertake primary research on specific issues of concern, and this can be proactive or on request by the committees of parliament. And we also do policy briefs and bill analysis. So when a bill is introduced in parliament by the executive, we undertake a detailed bill analysis to ensure that this is well informed. And what are the other aspects that we've opened up so that we can work with others and facilitate this process better? So we have a partnership with the UBOS, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, that provides us statistical data when need arises. We also work closely with the EPRC, where ISMA is based, to get independent assessments that come from outside. We work with ECAS for rapid assessment on issues that emerge also for committees. They have been very instrumental during the COVID times. And we have other partnerships also with, like also the NURU, is the National Union of Research in Uganda. On the side of Uganda Evaluation Association, so I'm wearing two hats today. They facilitate the process of capacity building. So the staff of the department are institutional members of the Uganda Evaluation Association, and so they facilitate the learning from that side. But also when we have the Uganda Evaluation Week, for example, we usually have parliament and members of parliament come to talk about what they do there. Lastly, I'll just mention in 1 minute now, we have the UPNOD Uganda chapter, the Africa Parliamentary Network on Development Evaluation. So I've talked about the technical side, but this is the political side that advocates for use of evidence. It involves members of parliament, and in a way it's also to raise momentum for them to appreciate why evidence is important in their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine. Edward, what is ECAS and how does ECAS perform the functions of an evidence intermediary?
Thank you very much. So my name is Kayongo Edward, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis. For those of you who are not from Uganda, welcome to Uganda. I hope you're enjoying your stay. This is the Pearl of Africa. So when you go back home, just be sure to mention you are in the Pearl. It's really beautiful. So about the session, so ECAS is basically a group of individuals who are so much interested in evidence and the use of evidence to inform policies and decisions, not only within Uganda, but within the region and Africa at large. So basically what we do is twofold. So we play the role of knowledge intermediaries or knowledge brokers, but we also undertake primary research when it comes to evidence-informed decision-making. I'm going to talk about that too, independent of each other. So as a knowledge intermediaries, basically we look for the evidence wherever it is, package it in such a manner that we make the information available to the policymakers and supply this information to the policymakers who end up using it to inform the policies and decisions. So we use the rapid response mechanism in getting this evidence into the policy space. Basically, the rapid response mechanism ensures that we get timely, relevant, and contextualized evidence to support the urgent need of evidence, and we define urgent as a decision that is going to be taken within 28 days. Within means it can be from 0 days to 28 days. So maybe something to note here is that that decision is going to be made within 28 days and not necessarily that the evidence is needed within 28 days. Where the difference comes in is that a policymaker can come to you, they tell you they need the evidence within 2 weeks, but the actual policy that is going to inform is going to be within 2 months or 3 months. So the policymaker has this perceived urgency for need of the evidence, but in reality, it is not really urgent need. So in that case, we usually refer the policymakers to some other groups that provide the evidence within longer than 28 days. So our major interest is that we have limited resources and we should be able to meet these urgent needs where the decision is within 28 days. So that is basically what we do on that end. Some of the products we produce include the rapid response briefs, we have citizen briefs, we have policy briefs. Now, for the policy briefs, it's usually longer than 28 days. It's difficult to produce a policy brief within 28 days because here you're going to provide evidence that spans across the entire policy question, from what the problem is, from the available options for solving this problem, and then you also have to provide possible implementation strategies for the different options, and also provide the cost-effectiveness analysis. But for the rapid response brief, it is usually a very targeted question. A question could probably be focused on understanding what the problem is, or understanding the different available options for intervening in a particular problem, or ways of implementing a particular option that has already been chosen by the policymaker. Sometimes, though rarely, we get questions on cost effectiveness. Usually our cost effectiveness comes in the broader policy briefs, not in the rapid response briefs. Then on the side of primary research, ECAS usually tries to be at the forefront of innovations when it comes to evidence-informed decision-making. So in this, we always try to understand how better can we provide the kind of service that we provide to the policymakers. So we keep exploring, trying to understand the policymakers' needs, trying to understand how better we can package this information, how better can we build trust between the knowledge intermediaries and the policymakers. Because at the end of the day, our relationship with the policymakers is based on trust. They have to be able to trust that you're going to provide evidence that is relevant to their policy process, but also unbiased evidence, and you are in position to deliver the evidence as and when it is needed. Otherwise, if you fail them on that front, chances are high the policymakers will always regress back to what they used to do without you. Because either way, whether you're around or not, the policies will have to be made. Whether they're informed by evidence or not, the policies will be passed. So you have to make yourself relevant, build that trust. So there is always that ongoing research from our end to try and understand some of these aspects. Packaging of the evidence is really important. Different policymakers need the evidence packaged differently. It is not always the same thing. You need to be able to come up with innovative ways in which you can package this evidence. So you always have to keep thinking, planning, think more like a primary researcher, but also think more like an evidence synthesis specialist at the same time. Okay. So in a nutshell, that is really what ECAS is.
Thank you very much, Edward, for that brief regarding ECAS. I'll go back to Vincent. How can the government support evidence-informed decision-making within its structures and processes, either within the Office of the President, but also outside the Office of the President for the departments and agencies for which you provide oversight?
Yeah, thank you. I think the government of Uganda has supported that because of, mere approving, for instance, the Apex platform, an institution that brings together institutions of government that are at the center of program or policy, project conceptualization, planning and budgeting, implementation, and then also the office that is in charge of implementation. Then again, creating a platform to synthesize all the evaluations that have taken place from different aspects to try and understand how an intervention has been effective or not. To me, I think that's one way of supporting the culture of evidence. But another one is also encouraging collaborations between the state and non-state actors to be able to utilize the findings of the non-state actors and then use them to inform or guide government policies. I see that one is also another way of supporting the culture of use of evidence. Basically that.
Okay. Thank you very much. To Josephine, how can researchers or other interested parties take advantage of the available pathways to engage with and support evidence decision-making processes?
Okay, thank you very much. I will start with what happens within Parliament, and then I'll cross again to Uganda Evaluation Association. So within Parliament, whenever Parliament is going to sit, we have what we call the order paper, which will be like agenda, but in terms of Parliament language, it's called the order paper. And this order paper is made open, it's accessible by the public on the website before the sitting of Parliament. Actually, the rules of Parliament now provide that the order paper for the week that follows is prepared a week before. So today is Thursday. By close of day tomorrow, we should be able to have the order paper of what business is going to happen in Parliament next week. So this gives our evidence generators and producers an opportunity and a kind of a roadmap to know what business is coming in the House and therefore what they need to do about this. So that is what happens in plenary in terms of the debates and the preparations for plenary. And we have another avenue in forms of committee system. So all our committees are open. We operate an open committee system for purposes of drawing in citizen evidence and also research evidence that comes from institutions. Like I mentioned, one here is the ECAS itself. We work so closely with them. And the committee, when we're having, for example, a bill before Parliament, they usually run in the newspapers an advert calling on anyone interested party or key stakeholders, primary and secondary stakeholders in this bill. If it's an issue of land, if it's an issue of, let's say, road safety, if it's an issue of environment, education, health, there are key players in this area who have already, specialized. So they'll reach out to the public generally in the newspapers, but also the committee will write, targeted invitations to stakeholders in civil society organizations and research bodies to come and give feedback on this bill that is before Parliament. So it's also another way of opening up for them to come and participate. The last one is about petitions. So the public has the open platform for petitioning when there is an issue that is happening and they think that Parliament is not moving fast. They can bring a petition through the office of the Speaker, and this petition is fast-tracked, and it will usually summon the side of the executive to show cause on what actions are being taken and what needs to be done in terms of hearing also from the petitioners on the issues that emerge. Let me just mention that in Uganda we have the whistleblowers law, and so in a way it also provides an avenue of people who want to remain anonymous to provide information in Parliament, and they are protected. So when people bring information and they prefer being anonymous under the Whistleblowers Act, nobody's going to victimize them and come after them. Let me mention also the last one now on the side of Uganda Evaluation Association. We've worked closely with the Office of the Prime Minister, setting up the mapping of practitioners and evaluation professionals in the country so that we get to know who is where in terms of skill base. And then we work also together at the end of the month. Every last Thursday of the month, we have the National Evaluation Talks, and we bring people with different methodologies to come and share their experiences with members of the association, and it's open, even others, so that we get to know what is happening out there, and in a way we grow together. Thank you.
Edward, how can knowledge brokers like yourselves position themselves better to engage with and support decision-making processes? She's already mentioned you are working with the Parliament of Uganda, but how can you better engage with institutions beyond Parliament as well as Parliament?
Thank you very much for that question. And I should say it is one of the things that we constantly ponder over and keep thinking about how better to do this. But currently, the strategy we are using at ACAS is building relationships and trust. Yesterday, we had a lengthy discussion about relationships. But at the end of it all, what is really most important is for the policymakers to know that they can trust you to provide unbiased evidence, so that they can trust you to provide that evidence when it is needed. So how do we go about this? One of the basic things we do is inviting policymakers to attend conferences like this one. We have several policymakers who are attending Evidence 2023. Then we also invite policymakers for breakfast meetings. These are usually short meetings, probably like 2-3 hours, where we talk to the policymakers, tell them about what ACAS is, what ACAS does, what kind of service we can offer to them. Maybe something I hadn't mentioned, ACAS uses a demand-driven strategy. We rarely do horizon scoping. We usually prefer for the policymakers to come to us with policy questions, because that way we are almost sure that the evidence we are going to provide is going to be used to inform a policy or a decision, versus if you push the evidence to the policymakers, you are external to the process, you're just coming in with your evidence, which they didn't ask for, so it might not be used. So in all the efforts we undertake is to try and show the policymakers how to identify questions that need evidence, because literally speaking, all policy processes require evidence. But how would you get the policymaker to appreciate that they need evidence? And how are you going to get them to appreciate that there is a difference between a primary producer of evidence, a difference between a content expert and a KT practitioner, a knowledge translation practitioner? You need to be able to get the policymakers to that understanding of all those differences, because some of the policymakers have experts, they have numbers of content experts. So if they're talking about cancer, they'll pick up a phone call in Parliament, call someone within the cancer department at Makero, within Mulago National Referral Hospital. They get evidence. Such evidence from an expert is usually biased with the expert's opinions and lived experiences. So you need to get the policymakers to trust you. I think the key thing here is relationships and trust. The ways in which you're going to build the relationships is what is going to differ. The other strategy you use for building relationships is using evidence champions among the policymakers. So you'll find that you have a policymaker you've worked with for probably the last 1 to 3 years. So you're going to work through that particular policymaker who is already converted to believe in evidence and evidence-informed decision-making, to introduce you to his other colleagues. That way you get a more soft landing compared to if you come out of the blue and you're trying to set up meetings. Sometimes it will be a little bit hard. Then we also use policymakers during our breakfast meetings and dissemination workshops to talk about their lived experiences working with us, to fellow policymakers. So here you have someone from the policymakers' end talking about you to fellow policymakers. So in one way or another, it further builds the trust among the policymakers you haven't worked with previously, to know that you actually provide a service that is good because it is one of them talking on your behalf. Then the other strategy that we rarely use, but sometimes we go to it, is trying to use the top-bottom kind of approach. If you know a minister, a permanent secretary, sometimes you work through them to get the different departments to push questions towards ACAS. The challenge with that is that many times, if you use that kind of approach, the people within the policy analysis units or the commissioners and the like, they might ask the questions simply because their permanent secretary has instructed them to use the service you're offering. It does not necessarily mean that they will be able to use the evidence. So that is an approach that is still a little bit shaky, something that we need to further think about and modify, but it is also one of the easiest ways to use. But at the end of it all, I think it is relationships and trust that would push the use of evidence further within governments and ministries. The very basic example is our work with Vincent and Josephine. So with Vincent, we've worked with him for 3 years now. Yeah, so we've worked with Vincent for like 3 years now. We've participated in different reports that have gone to the Apex platform. So right now I can comfortably say that Vincent trusts the kind of work that we do. His unit is already sending questions to ACAS, and we are sure that evidence is being used because we've attended some validation meetings within Apex. Josephine also keeps talking to us and asking us for evidence. That relationship is built on trust. So that is what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to take you back, so what happens when policymakers don't demand for this evidence?
Very good question. So we've had a few scenarios. So I'll give an example of COVID-19 global pandemic. So at the beginning of COVID-19 global pandemic, as ACAS, we felt like we had a big role to play in shaping the direction the country was going to take in addressing the global pandemic. However, in the first, let's say, 1 to 3 months of COVID getting to the country, because I think we recorded our first case of COVID around March 2020. So there was a panic, like in most of the other countries globally. So government rushed into lockdowns and the different things that were done to try and control the pandemic for COVID from spreading within the country. I can't really say it was the best strategy or not, but we were left out of the initial stages of the decision-making process. So it was now up to us to tap into our connections within the Ministry of Health to try and push the people who are at the decision-making table to come and request for the evidence from us. So we worked through evidence champions. We worked through one of our directors, Professor Nelson Sawankambo and Dr. Rona, who have deep roots within the Ministry of Health. We had one of the professors at School of Public Health who was on the committee that was directly reporting to the president. So we had to look for those particular individuals who we could approach and tell them, you know what, we are still available, we can still offer that service. We also had to work through some commissioners that we had previously worked on other questions, and they were not directly involved in the response to COVID-19, but they could get the evidence to the decision-making table. So at the end of it all, you try your level best to ensure that you have constant demand. And as I said, at ACAS, we also have the primary research angle to it. So we keep thinking of innovative ways on how to stimulate this demand and keep the questions flowing, because we still need to support evidence processes, decision-making processes with evidence.
Okay, thank you. Vincent, so many institutions have talked, they are working with the Office of the President, but could you explain to us the funding mechanisms available for the promotion and use of evidence in government policies and programs?
Well, we basically don't provide funding as Office of the President to gather evidence from the partners we work with. For instance, ACAS, we make a request on a topical issue, and they use their own available resources, and they give us the kind of information we use, and then we build on that to push it further to cabinet. But we have also tried to make some bit of networking and collaboration with agencies like UNDP, where we source for funding of some studies, and UNDP has helped us on funding some studies that at least gives us some information to build on as we search for evidence. And but for the ministries, like for instance, the Apex framework is built on the concept of the policy life cycle. We look at the institutions that have been implementing, that have conceptualized the interventions we are trying to examine, and then those that are in charge of planning and financing, and those in implementation. So those institutions, we require them to use their resources, but in some cases, we also complement specific studies within institutions which are targeting a certain topic that we are looking at. And once that one is produced, it becomes now a collective document that we sponsor. But basically, the funding mechanism we use in APEX is basically through networking and collaborations with institutions that can fund their own studies and those that we can co-fund partly for specific studies, not for every work we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vincent. To Josephine, what are some of the different strategies available to strengthen the governance structures that can support systems for evidence-informed decision-making?
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll speak broadly because I am in the government, circle, in the broad approach that the government has taken. I will start with the national M&D policy. And so this sets a path or a framework upon which we are setting up evidence, both on the side of the data itself, but also the personalities, the resources, the persons, and the data. And then I'll go to the National Technical Working Group, the National M&D Technical Working Group. This is like a gatekeeper. They undertake peer review of evidence pieces in forms of evaluation reports that government has produced. And before this gets into cabinet, the National M&D Technical Working Group does the kind of sieving. So whether this has been undertaken by an independent evaluator or by an institution, this technical working group supports this process of repackaging and refocusing the findings so that they can be used better by the cabinet, where I'm also a member. I will also talk about the government annual performance report. So it's a whole of government approach to performance assessment, and it's also evidence-based on how different sectors in the country are performing, and also the findings that come from here get through cabinet, and it's a very influential process. They're actually having their meeting yesterday and today that informs the next budgeting and planning for the government. I will also talk about the Civil Service College. It is in charge of capacity building, so this is also another strategy that the government has undertaken. It's in charge of capacity building for the M&D cadre. And recently, in the month of April, the Public Service approved operationalization of the scheme of service for the M&E cadre. So this is going to help us to put in place the relevant personalities and specialities of individuals to facilitate evidence use in the country. Within the Parliament of Uganda, like I said, we have members who are already in the association of the Uganda Evaluation Association, but also our team is highly multidisciplinary. So when we have an issue that, just one question that you asked, Vincent, issues of funding, when we have an issue that we think we cannot handle within Parliament, we actually have a small budget, I'm calling it small, to reach out to specialists who can give us, a quick, rapid assessment of a specific issue of concern so that we are not having any gap when need arises for information. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I move to the wider plenary to pose questions to my panelists, Edward, does ECAS mobilize resources to support demand-driven, evidence-informed decision-making exercises?
Okay, thank you. So ECAS runs on grant money mostly for the kind of service we offer. So the reason as to why our service to the policymakers is free, not necessarily free because someone is meeting the bills, that's usually the different funding institutions. But the policymakers, the reason as to why our service is free for them, it's because we are trying to build a culture of evidence-informed decision-making within the country. So if you tag a cost to the service, chances are high you're going to deter many of the policymakers from coming to you for the evidence because they don't have the budget for that. You already had Vicent and Josephine talk about the little resources available within their different units. It is the same across the entire government. We do not necessarily have a different docket of money that is set aside for evidence to police within government. So we try our level best to ensure that we lobby for funds from different sources, mostly through funding institutions. Then we offer the services to the policymakers at no cost.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to open it up to the members in the audience. Anyone who would wish to pose a question to any of our panelists, I'm going to request some help in moving the mic, please. So, first, second, and third.
Thank you very much. Such a great panel and for all the experiences shared. What I would really like to ask, maybe it goes to ACAS. And when you were talking, you talked about having innovative ways of presenting the evidence. So what I really want to ask is, what are those innovative ways? Because I work with a policy research institute, so we basically do what ACAS does. And mostly ways of synthesizing the evidence is usually has to do with maybe policy brief, position papers, like those kind of shorthand notes. So I really want to know other innovative ways that you present your evidence. And then now also we would want to know how rapid is your rapid? Like when you say rapid assessment, what does it really mean to provide like rapid evidence to these policymakers? Thank you very much.
We'll take two more before I ask the panelists to respond. He had his hand up here, and as well as the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and the fellow panelists. My name is Serge Yakudiam. I'm the co-chair of Eval Indigenous Networks. It's a global movement of indigenous evaluation practice worldwide. So we cover Africa, Asia, and North America with the First Nation in Canada and North America. So a very interesting panel, especially when we have decision makers on the board. And then I really enjoyed the discussion, but I want to know one thing. What is the boundary, or not the boundary, but what is the connections has, regarding a country management, you have a little flow of data, flow of information coming in, and then you have to select very specific information or evidence information to take a decisions. Is there within, but I didn't see where you talk about something like knowledge management office, where you get those flows of basket of informations, or let's say databases, where we stock all those data, and then took time to go back and analyze and synthesize and look about the key information you will need to take a decision, especially for Josephine and the chairperson. So how do you manage that? Because it didn't come very clear within your discussions. How do you process and get key information people are looking for to say that you do this, we decide on that? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. In the middle, right.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question on behalf of an online participant. Thank you for the opportunity. The question is, where is the evidence published for others to use? That's Joanita Nalunjoki, who is asking as an online participant. Thank you. Where is the evidence published maybe for others to be able to access? I'm sure mainly to ACAS, I think you are publishing a lot and doing a lot, but maybe where do the people who are interested in following this evidence access them?
There is also a gentleman right in the middle there we've been missing. Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Remy Ayede. I'm Research and Optic League at the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, Nairobi. My really concern is In the many years you have worked with policy communities, how would you say that there has been, or you have catalyzed a change in the culture of the use of evidence in government or any other organization that you have worked with? Because you have talked about, your role, but the ultimate will be to get to a point where government or policymakers are searching for evidence and contacting organizations like yours or ours to help them with solving problems.
Thank you very much. You'll be the last, then.
Yeah, my name is Maxwell Bano. I'm from Ghana, working with an NGO called Tere, based in Bogatanga in the Upper East region. Was a very informative session. I would like to know how receptive is government when evidence is presented to them. I'm asking this question on the background that there are times governments put up some project in a community and then the people will not use the facility. And so when you have organizations like ICA, my organization, generating evidence and presenting it to government, and then these evidence are in the interest of the people, all right? And then on the other side, you find government implementing projects that are not participated by the citizens. And so how receptive is the government when evidence is presented to them? Thank you.
Thank you. There was a lady here. She will be the final one because I'm mindful of the time and we could have another round if we have time. Please.
Thank you. My name is Gloria Anderson from Tanzania. I just have a very straight question. How is the engagement of the policy beneficiaries, like the citizens or the young people? Where are they being included in the whole process of implementation and the making? That's what I want to know, because recently there has been a lot of fights, especially from my country. The parliament is presenting matters and everybody's like, where is this coming from? A lot of contract policies and all that. So I just want to know from the experience of Uganda, how are you guys engaging them so they don't feel left behind? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll go back to my panelists. Several questions were raised. I'll start with Edward. There were several questions posed to you. Please.
Okay, thank you very much for these very good questions. So I'll start with a question on the innovative ways of presenting the evidence. So first and foremost, we do the very basic, the reports. So ours are rapid response briefs. So within the structure of the rapid response brief, it has the first page that has the summary of the key messages that we want to put across to the policymakers. Then after that first page, then inside the rapid response brief, there are all those details in case the policymakers wants to read more. The most important thing is that summary of the first on the first page, because sometimes our policymakers are too busy and they are not going to read a 5-pager. So if you can give them the first page, that is perfect. Then we've also piloted the use of easy-to-read policy profiles. So the easy-to-read policy profiles, they are a little bit different from the rapid response briefs and the policy briefs. So these ones just present the entire evidence in form of bullet points with the use of a few cartoons here and there to break the monopoly of bullet points. So we've piloted this kind of structure on 2 different policy dialogues so far, where we provide the policymakers with the easy-to-read evidence profiles, then also provide them with either the rapid response brief or the policy brief. And compared what we've seen with the policy dialogues, where we provide the usual kind of evidence. And to our surprise, for these policy dialogues where we presented the easy-to-read policy profiles, evidence profiles, the policymakers are more informed heading into these dialogues. So it is basically because you've given them all the information they need within a form of bullet points, and the policymaker will only go to the bigger document to try and expound on a particular bullet, which probably they think they need more information about. That is the other way we've done it. Then when it comes to the citizens' engagement into the policy process, we started off using citizen briefs, which is more or less the same as a rapid response brief, but easier language. But we've moved on to using illustrations, which we are terming illustrated evidence profiles. So the illustrations have mostly illustrations with minimal to no words. In that, the citizens, when they interact with this evidence in form of illustrations, they can easily pick the message you're trying to send across. And if you're going to engage the citizens in an informed discussion, they also come to the discussion table informed by the evidence you've already provided to them. There are key questions about how we produce these illustrations and whether we are sure the illustrations communicate, but we go through a rigorous process. So we usually get a team of illustrators. These are not permanent members of ECAS, but we co-opt them every time we are going to do such an exercise. So we get the illustrators to come in, give us the first round of illustrations. We get the ECAS team to interact with these illustrations and do different modifications to them. Then we get citizens and bring them and ask them to tell us what they understand from the illustrations we are providing them with, right? So from the kind of feedback we get, we know what needs to be changed, or the citizens tell us if this is the information you want to present, then this illustration should be twitched to depict something different. So after you go through all that process, then we use these illustrations to engage citizens in an informed discussion. Then finally, this is something we are just starting out sometime this year, and probably I can put it out here because very soon we are going to reach out to the different evidence teams within this room. We are going to try and pilot the use of audio for evidence. So instead of providing the policymakers with all these beautifully written documents, how about if we transform this evidence into audio in form of a podcast where we have someone asking questions, another person responding to the questions. So if the policymaker is driving back home and they are in jam, they can play this audio on their radio, and by the time they go through 30 minutes and hour of traffic, they've already interacted with the evidence more than you could probably it would take probably longer to read the evidence profile or something like that. Okay. This is something we are going to pilot, but we are going to reach out to different teams to get them to engage with us so that we can collect rigorous data to compare how this is going to, the impact and how this is going to work out. So I've just let the cat out of the bag, but definitely before the conference ended, we are going to talk about this with the different teams. But that is something that we are also going to try out. So as I said, we keep thinking and trying our level best to see how best we can do this. So more ideas will always keep coming up, but so far, those are the things that we are really trying out with.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Vicent. There were several questions raised, ranging from what are the knowledge management processes, how receptive is government, and so many others in a minute or two.
Yes, I think I will try to use an example of a recent study we have conducted and how we have done it. Hopefully that will answer the issue of inclusivity, where the youth coming in and others, and also it may partly answer your concern of how other various stakeholders contributing to the knowledge management. So under the Apex framework, we have what we call eco-knowledge management system, whereby we, like for instance, in this case, we did a study on commercialization of agriculture and its impact on local economic development. We're trying to find out what interventions have gone into commercialization of agriculture over a period of 13 years. that is from 2010 to 2023. And we are trying to trace to see what has gone there, what has worked, what has not worked, and what needs to be done in order possibly to achieve the intended objectives. So in the process, we had to conduct primary data. There was a diagnostic study funded by UNDP, which we built on, and then we got some primary data to try, because the diagnostic study was basically based on the secondary data, but we had to go and down and also collect some evidence from where those interventions went. And we collected some information through talking to the beneficiaries and conducting some group discussions and picking some information from the leaders in the countryside. And then when we came up, we are tasked, like in government, we have various institutions charged with different mandates. For instance, Ministry of Finance mobilizes funding and allocates. So we asked the Ministry of Finance to get us all a compilation of all the intervention, the funding that went into interventions to promote commercialization of agriculture in the local economic development. So they gave us all the kind of money that was spent even on other related interventions that were meant to promote commercialization of agriculture. Then we have Office of the Prime Minister, which basically coordinates implementation of government programs. So on a yearly basis, they conduct performance evaluation of those interventions. So they gave us information from their own perspective on how the interventions have been appraised on a year on for the last 13 years. Then we tasked National Planning Authority to give us the milestones in the National Development Framework. Then we tasked the EPRC, we tasked these other stakeholders, the ISO, for instance, that is the Internal Security Organization, to also get us their own information. We read the work of Josephine in that specific sector. So we integrated all this and synthesized and came up with a report which we subjected to all interested groups, including the youth, women, and the farmers. And from there, we came up with key recommendations that we pushed through up to the steering committee, and now the report is ready for cabinet to pronounce itself. So first of all, that's how we gather information from key stakeholders, then we publish it. After cabinet has pronounced itself, it can be found on the website, and certainly we shall run press briefs on what outcomes came out of that, and that's how we manage. So if you are looking for that kind of information, you can always find it on our website. So we publish by putting that kind of information on the websites. We publish by putting some highlights in the press, and also by having documents in terms of series 1, series 2, series 3. So those documents are there. If you're looking for that kind of knowledge, you can find it, which is an integrated knowledge. Then there was an issue of is the government effective in utilizing evidence that is brought to it? I would say yes. It is not only, is it in Ghana, where some interventions are abandoned, and then you bring information to government. We also have the similar situations here. So once we get that kind of information from even the whistleblowers, as you have heard from Josephine, we try to find out what exactly is the problem. What are the underlying causes of this kind of thing? And quite often you find that possibly the beneficiaries were not consulted when the intervention was being formulated. So when you put it there, certainly people can't use it. So we come and try to influence change of policy in terms of how we conceptualize and formulate our projects, and then we come up with various policy guidelines on how we should approach. And I think finally it was the issue of inclusivity from my sister there, which I have, I think, talked about, because we try in as much as possible, especially at the pre-apex level, when we are validating, we try to call all various categories of stakeholders to come and participate and share their views on how best we can promote or maybe shape a recommendation that will inform policy for effective results.
Josephine, in 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just pick two and then I can hand over back to you. The issue of where is the evidence published. So for the government is the government evaluation facility, the general reports that come from the evaluations. But for the parliament, especially the research department, we have a portal, drs.parliament.go.ug/8082. And when you put this in your URL, you'll be able to see the different reports that the department has published. So what we do a one-pager document called Hot Topic every week, and we divert members of parliament through this hot topic to this portal. So we'll pick a report on a specific issue, let's say road safety, talk about it, and then tell the members, put a link and say the full report on this can be found on this portal. And then on the voices of the young people, so Parliament of Uganda is very well structured in terms of representation. So we have youth as a special interest group that is represented in Parliament. So whenever issues emerge that relate to the youth, we use these special interest groups as the voices of the people. So just to point out that as we try to advance evidence, the evidence is important, but also who is talking is also very, very important. So we try to identify these evidence champions so that they are the ones who speak with the evidence that we have given to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give each panelist a maximum of 1 minute to give us their recommendations on how to make progress going forward. I'll start with my most immediate neighbor, Edward.
Thank you very much. So what I would say from KT practice point of view is that we should just ensure to keep on building relationships with the policymakers. And where possible, let us try to formalize these relationships. In any engagement, there is the role of the informal kind of approach to a relationship, but also the formal one really plays a key role. As ECAS, we've previously entered an MOU with Vicent's office, the Apex platform. We have an MOU with them where we are going to keep on working with them on different knowledge products to try and support decision making. We also have an MOU with the Ministry of Health. So these MOUs have their role they play in the relationships, but also don't throw away the informal kind of relationships, because informal sometimes plays a key role in this, because not every time someone is going to send you an email. Sometimes someone just wants to send you a text. Sometimes you're going to meet the policymaker probably for coffee or at a bar, and if you don't have an informal kind of relationship, they'll never approach you with a policy question. So just the policymaker seeing you somewhere, they should be in position to approach you because you've built this kind of informal relationship with them. Then you can be able to support more and more of these policy and decision-making processes within government.
Thank you very much, Edward. Josephine, your final word on how we make progress in a minute or less.
I encourage us to keep engaging, that one time, one day, your evidence will be picked up. But even as you engage, be timely, be relevant, and be focused on what you want to influence. Thank you.
Vicent, your final word.
Yeah, networking, collaboration, and creating platforms for knowledge sharing, I think are very fundamental in the use of evidence.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I wish to thank our audience, the physical audience here, as well as the online audience for the engagement. A very big hand clap to the panel this morning. Thank you.
So colleagues, we have a 5-minute break, which is really just a comfort break to allow you to switch rooms if you want to. So there are now 2 sessions following this. There's a session in here, which we're calling a localization funders panel. And I don't have my program, but if you check your pocket program, oh, actually, no, mine's over there. Check your pocket program and you will get the details of the session downstairs. So you can either stay here, pop out to the bathroom, or move downstairs if you prefer. We're starting back in here in 5 minutes.
Hello. Yeah, my microphone is on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right, I'll go mute.
Andrea, this is Bertha. We're just about to get started. Right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Bertha Snilstveit. I'm the Director for Synthesis and Reviews at 3IE and head of our London office. I have the great pleasure of co-chairing this session with Harsha Dayal from DPME and AEN in South Africa. I'll hand over to Harsha in a minute to introduce herself a bit more and our panel. But first, just to say a few words, kind of framing why we are doing these sessions. So, as I'm sure you all know, concepts such as localization and decolonization has gained prominence in the development discourse in recent years and are increasingly featured in the policy statements of major aid agencies, for example, and funders. And at the heart of these ideas are objectives around local ownership, agencies with the resources that today are close, that are going to primarily northern organizations, directed to a larger degree to organizations in the global south. The rationale for this agenda is both one of equity and ethics, but it's also one of effectiveness and relevance. As been made quite clear, I think, so far in this conference, a key theme is the importance of national evidence generators and brokers for effective and sustainable institutionalization of evidence. And I think the point was made yesterday that EIDM also has a role in improving the functioning of the state, which further highlights why the importance of national actors driving this agenda. But these ideas are not new. They've been coming and going in development discourse. But despite these stated goals and of many actors, the development in the development and evidence communities for decades, progress is still limited in terms of resources and voice. So, for example, a study from 2021 looking at the articles published in top development journals found that between 1990 and 2019, almost 3/4 of the articles were published by Northern researchers. We've done a similar analysis of data on our development evidence portal. There the picture is looking a bit better, and that might be because we're also including grey literature, so unpublished studies. But there is still huge amounts of literature being published about countries in the Global South with no authors from those countries. This event has so far highlighted the energy and creativity and capacity of you all and across the continent. And so imagine what would be possible if the resources were a bit more equally distributed than what it is today. So why have we not made more progress? Why does most of the funding go to Northern organizations and researchers in the North? What are the key barriers to localization? And what are promising strategies for addressing these barriers? And how can national and global organizations work together to facilitate a shift? So these are the key questions that are motivating this panel, and the panel will be followed by a workshop. So we really hope that you will come back after the break and help come up with very concrete and constructive ideas based on your experience for how we can together make more progress towards greater localization. And so with that, I'll hand over to Harsha.
Thank you so much. I didn't put anything on, so this is working, right? So thanks, Berte, and a very warm welcome to our panelists. My name is Harsha Dayal. I'm Director of Research and Knowledge Management in the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, DPME in short, in the South African Presidency. So I think this localization opportunity for this hour, Adeline yesterday had thrown a challenge to us, and I think we can take this challenge head on to start unpacking this issue of localization. And very nicely, I think, other than the evidence agenda, you also put out, is localization a metaphor? And, you know, on the other side, it really is about coming home. And I don't know if we want to ask ourselves, is localization the opposite of globalization? So it's really more than that, right? But I think for us, coming home means, and maybe let's stick with localization if you don't, even if you don't agree with the definition of it per se. It is about identity, about belonging, and, you know, we talk about cohesion, right? But then I'm really intrigued to hear from the panelists, because when it comes to the evidence agenda, it's about, from a public perspective as well, these multiple realities and who's defining these multiple realities. So we really want to hear from the panelists. You do have it in your packs where the panelists do come from. I don't want to take up too much time in introducing them because we really want to hear what they say, but they are, we're going to go in this order. So Sajelu Kamwendo, he is from the MasterCard Foundation, Outcome and Impact Evaluation Director. We have Andrea O'Donis-Llanos from Executive Southern Voice, and she's joining us online. Then we have Chris Chibwana, he's Program Officer from the Hewlett Foundation. And then we have Maurice Motsia, just on my right-hand side now, from Kenya, Director of Research from the CZ Africa Foundation. So, colleagues, I think I'm going to say to you that we want to pose very specific questions to you. If you can take maybe 3 minutes to introduce yourselves if you need to still, and your reflections and perspectives on localization. So, Sajelu, let me start with you, right? What does success look like from your perspective in the localization agenda?
Thanks, and good morning, everyone. Sajelu is my name. I work with the MasterCard Foundation. So briefly maybe about the foundation. What we're looking at is to accelerate opportunities for young women and men, transitioning them to dignified and fulfilling work. We have Young Africa Works strategy, aiming at 30 million young women and men. And then we also work with indigenous communities in Canada. What does success look like when we talk localization? First of all, acknowledging that it's a very difficult conversation, but MasterCard Foundation has a position on that. Firstly, we have moved from Canada to establish presence here in Africa. So our offices are here. We do have programs in Canada, but you find most of our senior managers, most of our people here. And we are committed. We have clear goals in terms of working with local partners. Our current goal is to work with 75% of local indigenous partners. What does success look like? I will focus on how we do impact or evidence. We have a strategy, our impact strategy. One of the key aspects there is around what we call honoring indigenous ways of knowing. Very clear about that. There's no ambiguity. We acknowledge that we should honor local context. We should honor local ways of knowing, because we know that what gets measured is political. We want to measure what matters for the young women and men in Africa and even our indigenous communities in Canada. Success as well means inclusion. We have to acknowledge, I think my colleague Adeline spoke about decolonization. Most of us, myself included, much of my education really was a product of colonialism, studied anthropology, and much of my readings in anthropology were coming from the global north. So we need to talk about how inclusive the field of evidence is. We also need to celebrate diversity. Africa is a continent of diversity. So for me, success related to inclusion is diversity. When we say we measure what matters, so what matters for someone in Kitgum in northern Uganda might be different for someone in Kalashane in Eswatini. So appreciating that diversity as well is important. And then non-extractive ways of getting evidence as well. Evidence Sometimes we can be very extractive. I've been guilty of that, guilty as charged, but acknowledging that as we collect data as well, it should not be extractive. And then maybe lastly, really, just to come back to measuring what matters. As a foundation, we're doing quite a number of measurement processes across the continent. In Africa and Canada, we just rolled out baseline surveys around youth employment. Before doing that, we reached out to young women and men and said, what does it mean for you to transition to dignified and fulfilling work? And we went beyond the numbers, talking of quality of life. What does quality of life mean for the young women and men we work with? I'll pause here for now. Thank you.
Andrea, is she online there? Can we get Andrea?
Yeah.
Online?
Hello, can you hear me?
Andrea,
Yeah.
while you're coming online, same question. Just to reflect for 3 minutes, what does success look like from your perspective in the localization agenda?
First, thank you for the invitation and for welcoming me virtually. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Which is 5 different strategies, but I think the one that's more relevant to this work is what we call the evidence-informed policy-making strategy. And the goal there is to help governments in East and West Africa to more systematically use data and evidence for decision-making, supporting the work of think tanks. I think a lot of organizations that are here have worked in one way or another with the Hewlett Foundation. And so I think within that context, localization is a big issue. It's a big priority for us. And I think I'll speak about why that is, and then get to the question of what does success look like for us. So we just went through a refresh of our strategy, which we've been implementing since 2015. And I think one of the things that came very clearly in the evaluation of the previous strategy is how we get to impact. That I think we found that relationships between policymakers and evidence producers and evidence translators, brokers, whatever you call them, trusted relationships are critical to bridging that evidence to policy gap. And the closer that actors are to policymakers, the easier it is to bridge that gap, to build that trust. Now, you can do that if you're operating from outside of Washington, D.C., or the western part of the US, but it's just harder. It's easier if you're in Kenya, the policymaker is in Kenya, you're in Uganda, the policymaker is in Uganda. So I think we're using the term proximate instead of local, proximate actors, which could be actors that may not necessarily be entirely African, but they have their whole staff based in Ghana, they have the whole staff based in Senegal. They're very close to the policymakers that we're hoping to help. And so for purposes of impact, it just makes sense for us to work closely and support the work of those proximate actors. It's also just sustainable for the work that we do. I think there's an example from during COVID, when COVID first happened. I remember I was in Zambia back in 2020, working for a somewhat proximate organization. It is a proximate organization. And other organizations that were not non-African, had a lot of non-African staff. What happened, I think we all saw that there was just an exodus of people. People just left and went back to their countries because everybody was afraid that COVID would overwhelm our health systems in Africa. And these were people that were working with policymakers, helping them make decisions. And as you all remember, during COVID was when we saw the most demand for evidence. But those people left. And then our policymakers were left to their own devices to make decisions. The organizations, however, that were local and proximate still had their staff in Africa. And they continued to work and help the policymakers to generate evidence around school closures, school reopenings. And then after those waves of COVID went away, those people came back, and then they tried to make themselves relevant again. So you see how, from a strategic and impact and a dignity perspective, it just makes sense to support those that are very close and proximate to decision makers. Now I'm preaching to the choir because I think we all believe that it's important. But I think for us then, what does success look like? I think there are two elements. One is that the proximate actors that we work with have more capacity to do their work. So that's capacity to generate evidence, to communicate that evidence to policymakers. But then that also goes with resources, that they actually have the budget to be able to do that work. That I think if we combine those two, we'll have a stronger ecosystem of proximate and local organizations that are close to policymakers that in the long run will continue to support this work and support policymaking.
Thank you so much. Andrea, let's check if we can hear you. We're not seeing Andrea. Can online support please help us there? All right. I hope we're going to... Apologies for that. I hope we're going to be sorted after the last of our panelists. Okay. Are we trying that?
Hello.
Good. We can hear her, but we can't see Andrea.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Can the volume be up a little bit? There we go. Andrea, we can see you, or we hope we can hear you. So Andrea, let me just pose the question again, and for you to reflect for the 3 minutes to on your perspectives of localization. What does success look like from your perspective in the localization agenda? Thanks, Andrea. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to join virtually. I'm Andrea Ordóñez, I'm director of Southern Voice. We're a network of over 60 think tanks across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, working on informing issues around sustainable development. I think that from our perspective, I was trying to think how to bring forward our way of working with the issue of localization. And I think for us, it's very much a vision of what maybe we could call a localization plus agenda. While we agree with the vision shown until now about localization and the relevance of local actors for their policymakers and for the discussions nationally, the plus that we believe in is that the organizations that are working locally across Africa, Asia, and Latin America have not only the capacity to inform policy at their national level, but also at the global level. So that's why I would put the plus there, because I think that for us, it's not only about localization in the sense of reducing the scope of work of these organizations to what happens locally, which may happen, because of the use of this word. And I see Chris suggesting a different phrasing also around it. But so for us, it's a vision of course, we need strong institutions and strong organizations at the nationals and local levels across the Global South. And we also need these organizations to be able to influence global debates. And that is because we do want to cut through these perceptions that we've developed across the research ecosystem, that when knowledge is developed in the global north, it's universal, and when it's done at the global south, then it's just particular and contextual, right? So we want to make sure that we, in the process of strengthening organizations in the global south, we do not perpetuate this perspective, but that we actually break it. And that's we can talk about localization plus. So strengthening local organizations for local evidence, but also for global influence. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Boris, over to you.
Yes, thanks and good morning, everyone. I can introduce myself, Mutisia Morris. I work with the Zizafrique Foundation. And I want to begin from that perspective. Zizafrique Foundation, we are 5 years old, is a local organization based in Kenya, locally founded. And we have been immersing ourselves in this debate around localization and what does that mean for sustainability and growth of the institution itself, but also the work that we do within Kenya and in the region. Our mission is all children and youth learning and thriving, and we are very much focusing on foundational skills, particularly literacy, numeracy, and social-emotional learning, which we think are strong foundations for children, for them to be able to grow and to be able to thrive in life. And we do that through evidence consolidation, through innovations, and as well as engagement. And for us, one key thing around localization is that you cannot be able to generate evidence without resources. So they go hand in hand. And in that case, we believe if we have to localize, one element is try to get the resources where they are also most needed. But then with that, examining that, we also examine it with a bit of contrast, also local funding. That is also essential for us. As much as we want to talk about localization, I think also pushing for local funding from our governments, from philanthropies that are based within the continent and within the countries that we are working in, so that as resources also trickle down, we also contribute into that debate. And also the development agenda of the region. But I want to focus on the localization also again around three elements and the success of it. 3 points, 3 or 4 points. One is about equals, where we see success is when institutions that are working within the context that we are in, and the global north and the south, there is kind of equality now. We treat one another. And I think that's critical when you're moving with the agenda. And that is tied closely to the shared value. And one of the values in the system is around issues of respect and trust. Because at the end of the day, we get resources from the north. And we get that resources, the trust that we can be able to deliver. We can be able to do the work that we have been entrusted with. And I think that when we have that trust and respecting the relationships that we have with the global north, I think that's become so critical in terms of growing and ensuring that localization itself thrives. I also want to reflect that around agenda setting, and I think the agenda setting of the work that we do, we are in a context where we are immersing ourselves with the experiences, we are immersing ourselves with the key issues that we need to be able to research on, issues that we need to be able to generate evidence on, issues that we know affect the populations that we want to serve and the children that we want to grow in terms of the education, where I'm coming from, the space of education. So, and I see localization in terms of that kind of a balance of what is global need, but also what is locally relevant. So that as much as we are working, we want have the ideas and the things that we think they're so pertinent to the population that they are serving, they're also getting resources to be supported, to generate the evidence, but also to engage better. I also want to, I think there is the element of capacity, and I think I see success whereby the local organizations have the capacity. And capacity for me is a little bit broad. I look at it in terms of the skills of the people that are there. I look at it in terms of the leadership. I look at it in terms of the systems that you do have to be able to even manage the resources that you have been given. I look at in terms of the element whereby there is even trust within our governments. And I want to pick on that because localization agenda is also tied to how are we going to utilize the evidence that the local organization utilize it, because we are utilizing that evidence for impact. And one thing that I've also seen is traditionally the governments coming in place and saying, I think we need this evidence. We can trust the evidence that we are generating. So in that space, it means if we are localizing and there is the capacity, there is the will also by the governments and the different stakeholders that are working in to be able to utilize that evidence for impact. Otherwise, we could be able to localize, we could be able to generate evidence, we could be able to write papers, journal papers, but it's actually not translating in terms of the lives that we need to effect. And lastly is about peer learning, where we are learning within the region, but also globally, because, and I'm a strong believer that localization doesn't necessarily mean having institutions that are inferior. It means growing institutions that can be able to compete at a global level. It means having institutions where the leadership is strong enough such that it's ethical, it's creative, is innovative, and can be able to compete at a global level. Otherwise, I don't see localization as a way of babysitting organization. I'm seeing them as a way of growing organizations to become competitive and to be organizations that can be global think tanks within the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about already just by looking at success from the angle of success. And Maurice, you brought out this relationship with government. So on the other side of success, maybe the second question we want to pose to you. I'm not sure if I want to go in the same sequence, but Sujela, you had a little bit of time, so maybe we can start with you again. On the other side of success, then what are the top 3 barriers for you to localization, which also includes shifting of power, which we already, all of you have touched on that, as well as resources to organization in the global south, which Maurice has also said. So, you know, from the other side of successes, what are the top 3 barriers to localization?
This is the question I read the most. What are the barriers to localization? The first one, as we talk localization, localization has to happen within an ecosystem that supports that agenda. So that's the first point that I need to make. We see efforts towards localization in different shapes and sizes, but largely it's fragmented. So, and I want to recognize that. I mean, for something to gain traction, someone has to start doing something. So there is a lot of fragmentation, especially in the evidence space. So probably if we start dealing with that, where we invite people to say, let's sit around the fire, and how then do we come together and create an ecosystem that supports local institutions. The second one relates to the local institutions. We're looking at, we talk about field building at the foundation, and what we mean by that is that we want to help and support local institutions to be more assertive when it comes to knowledge generation. So we find that their visibility sometimes is very difficult. Where I sit, I commission and manage evaluations, and when I'm looking for local firms, sometimes I have to admit it's a bit of a struggle. And then because of the pressure of work, you have to deliver these evaluations. You begin to say, who else can do this? And the default setting, unfortunately, sometimes is up north. So probably challenging people in this community of evidence generation as well to say, yeah, let's be more assertive, let's be visible when it comes to this as well. That's the other aspect. Of course, history, I'll go back to history. Adeline spoke eloquently about that. I mean, we have to acknowledge that when we talk about evidence, there's issues of, is this valid, is this credible? And then sometimes validity and credibility as gatekeepers. So again, that's another barrier as well that we need to talk about. It's not easy, it's a difficult conversation, but I see that as well as a barrier that we need to work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. Such spot-on answers, and also keeping it nice and tight, because those, each one can be unpacked, I'm sure. Over to you. Let me just check if Andrea is there in the audience to just keep with that. Andrea?
Yes, thank you. I think I would stress two challenges that the researchers that we've been speaking to across the Global South have highlighted to us. And then the first one is the issue of agenda setting, that if we transfer funds, if we transfer capacities, but we don't transfer the decision making on the agendas for research, then we are not fulfilling the aim of localization. And I think one of the reasons why we see sometimes these attempts at localization but that don't maybe stick, or that they don't last, is because they are not based on actually giving the power and the agency of leading on the agenda topic setting to the organizations that we want to shift the power to. So I think that's the one, because if we don't do that, then we're going to keep seeing organizations do some research, but then trying to steer towards the topics that they feel are relevant, right? So to sustain the prospects of localization, we really need to start with shifting the decision making around the agenda of studies and evidence creation. And then the second one I would add is a more persistent problem around the measures of credibility and quality that we use. That is also a very critical concern, because funders, national, international, they are all kind of like using different types of indicators and shortcuts to figure out who is doing good research. And right now, those shortcuts are stacked against organizations in the Global South, because if it's about publishing in high-ranking journals, if it is about having these publications that as the most important signal of quality, then of course the organizations, the local organizations, may not appear as credible and as trustworthy to donors and other actors. So that is something that is a more strategic and structural change that would be needed, and that I think would help also not only the equity and the quality of research in the Global South, but also in the Global North, because it's really targeted towards having a very small number of highly prestigious organizations, institutions, and journals. But we know that that is not the only marker of quality. In fact, one of the researchers we were talking to said it better. He said, now we don't care what we research, we only care where we publish it. And that is something that affects, of course, the localization agenda, because if these local issues are not relevant, are not seen as something related to quality, to trustworthy, then it's also going to keep failing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Chris, over to you. The top 3 barriers for you.
Yeah, so I think I'll touch on what I think others have mentioned. From sort of a funding perspective, I think there's just the issue of trust. That there's a lack of trust in local, the ability of local organizations to, one, set the agenda, sort of identify the right priorities, but then also to effectively use and manage funds, which then leads to a preference for international NGOs, international think tanks. And I'll speak about what we're doing as a foundation to try and do that. I think we practice what we call trust-based philanthropy, which is, you don't see Hewlett put out RFPs. I think we've only done that once as our evidence-informed policy-making strategy. All of our projects, all of our partnerships are co-created, that our partners are the ones that are in the lead. To the largest extent possible, we provide flexible funding, which then allows our partners to be able to flexibly respond to the needs of policymakers. Because I sit in the San Francisco Bay Area, the western part of the US. I don't sit here in Africa. I'm very far removed from the issues, from the problems that are happening. Yes, I'm African, I have the lived experience, but I feel like somebody who's in Uganda, ACAS, or our other partners are much more closer to the work and should be the ones to determine what really the priorities are. And so I think we, as a foundation, we're trying to shift as much of that decision-making power as possible and to simplify our processes. Because I think the other challenges with localization is just structural or institutional within the funding landscape. There's so much bureaucracy. I think you all know which funding not to apply to, because it's just going to kill your organization. You'll be asked for 200 pages of documents as part of the proposal. When it comes to reporting, you have to do 100 pages, and you have to do that every quarter. By the time you finish submitting the report, you're already working on the next report, and you don't have time at all to even do the work that you're being funded to do. And so I think as a foundation, we're also trying to change that and trying to find like-minded organizations, like-minded funders to begin to change practices. So if you look at our proposal template, if you've ever been invited to apply for funding at Hewlett, it's a maximum of 10 pages that you provide, and that's all. Our budget template is just 1 page. Our reporting, annual reporting, you report once a year, and it's a maximum of 15 pages. We don't even want any annexes at all, because we want to keep that burden as low as possible. And so what we're doing is then beginning to share these practices with other funders, hoping to begin to change overall practice, knowing that I think for other bilaterals, there are obviously laws and other systems that may not allow them to be as flexible, as nimble as we are, but I think there is scope for us to work with like-minded funders to begin to change those practices so that it's actually easier on local organizations to be able to access funding. And then I think the third is just these language and cultural barriers. I think Francophone West Africa is probably the one place that comes to mind, that a lot of us don't even know how to work in French. I think we're all very comfortable working in English, that when an organization comes from West Africa, there's an amazing organization, ACED, in Benin, that does amazing work. Thankfully, they're bilingual, but there are others that are not bilingual at all. And so when we see their proposal, and they've translated it using Google Translate, it doesn't render the same. Evidence terms don't come across the same. We just think, this is a very poor proposal. There's no way that I'm going to fund it. So we haven't invested in the systems ourselves to begin to understand the culture within these other ecosystems where we may not be comfortable working. And I think as a foundation, we're also trying to change that. One of my colleagues is actually from Senegal, and now is based out of Senegal, working, helping us to understand that region a little bit better and oversee that grant making within that region.
Thank you so much, Chris. Maurice, over to you.
Thanks. I just want to pick a point, a starting point from Chris, and particularly around the issues of standards and requirements. If you look, coming now from an implementing organization, most of our funding is project-based. And we have several donors that have different requirements, reporting timelines, and yet that project is not paying 100% of the time. It means someone has to cut across the 2 or 3 projects, and you have to report. So you spend so much time. I agree, Chris. I think that's, if we can get harmonization around reporting and requirements and standard, I think that would be critical. The second thing is around, I know it's good to do due diligence, to be able to know where the organizations are, but I think there is a positive aspect of it, of also working with organizations to be able to grow where there are weaknesses, and particularly financial systems, because they also cost money to invest on that. And if you do not have enough core funding, it means you may not have a very robust kind of financial standard systems that can be able to grow you, can be able to speak to the various requirements that the donor needs. So that I see as a barrier. And flexibility is also in terms of the funding. I know we tie most of it towards project activities, and in that a bit of flexibility in how you can be able to learn out of that work, other than output-based, but then flexibility whereby you can also be able to try some other things that are emerging within your system. I think that will put a lot of trust in delivery of organization and making organizations to be able to think outside the box. But then one key barrier I also note is around what you mean by localization. Do you have a common understanding around localization? And what models are working in terms of localization? And I'm happy to see quite a number of funders are now opening offices in this part of the world. Is that localization in the first place? The second thing that I'm seeing is also models whereby some funders may give, like you may get a university in the UK getting resources and then subcontracting a local organization to implement that. Is that localization? So I think if we can be able to develop a common understanding of what localization is, and that has a mutual benefit to the funder and to the local organization, I think that will be critical, such that we break that barrier. Otherwise, if we see several models, then it becomes elements whereby we are implementing, but actually we are not even in control of that evidence moving forward. But then there's also the issue of capacity. And I want to reflect this, again, on different note from my previous one, when it comes to barriers. And this is in relation whereby we have great minds in this part of the world. But in most cases, by the time you're emerging, also the global organizations snatch you. Then we are left again, that organization is like growing leaders. Anytime you thrive, then you're also gone. We have, so what does that also mean? And I think you can't control it, the brain drain, you can't control it. But I think within the context that we are in, is also finding ways of how to be able to keep those talents that can be able to help us maneuver some of these challenges, and particularly building a strong organization. I come back to the element of local funding, and I think that will still continue being one of the critical things that we need to continue investing in, and urging our governments to put some resources into research and advocacy. And tied to that is, you go to most of the African countries, they have created the National Research Fund, but it's geared towards STEM. Social sciences, you find there is actually very limited funding that is going there. Yet, we need a lot of evidence around these social issues. Education is social, these social issues. But if we focus on STEM alone, we create these technology, but they also have their own social elements into it. You cannot have growing someone STEM if they have not gone through quality education, if they are not living a healthy life. So we need to know these things are interdependent, and the localization aspect of it, also getting investments into it, I think that will be critical. But then there is a sense of responsibility that comes into it. And there's the ancient saying that to whom much is given, much is also expected. So it's standing up and saying, we need to deliver. We need to stand out. We need to showcase that we can actually be able to do it. Because you may have organizations that are invested with resources, but then they are also grappling with other issues of ethics or issues of trust. So that becomes so critical. And my last is around a united voice. I don't know. How do we work together? How do we speak the same language of localization? How do I speak today here and tomorrow go to a different forum and have a different language that I'm using? How do we grow that? How do we grow and focus around localization, building systems that we are growing one another and we are able to become resilient as we become globally competitive? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bertie, do we have time for one more question, or can we open up? Maybe. Okay, yeah, then we got. So, colleagues, a lot of food for thought, and in short time spans, the panelists have shared so much. Anyone with questions from the floor? And I'm not sure if someone's monitoring the online as well. I see a hand up there. 2 hands there. Okay, 3. Let me just say 1, 2, 3, and then we'll come on this side. Yeah, I see you and I see you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm monitoring the online feed. So this is a question from Martin Kapchanga, who's asking about how do we balance the benefits of funded projects to ensure that they're sustainable beyond the funding period. And I think that's an issue all of us have faced, whether we're funders or recipients of funds. So it'd be great to have your perspectives on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. I think we just keep that question and we take, there was one behind you and then another one, and we'll come back.
So thank you so much to our panelists. My name is Diana from JPAL. So my question is with regards to the length of funding. So knowing that the policy-making process usually can take a very long time before we actually see change or impact, I'm wondering whether the funding community is thinking about how do you innovatively have longer funding timelines. For instance, sometimes you can find funding is for 2 years, and maybe for you to be able to effectively influence policy, it may take up to 3, 4, 5 years. So sometimes you find institutions sort of leaving the processes hanging or trying to find other alternative ways to keep the process moving forward, sometimes with limited success, sometimes they're able to do better, but it would be great to hear what solutions are there.
Thank you, Dee. One more question, Bear, and then I'll come back to the panelists. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to delve deeper into the concept of localization. And so in my mind, I think of 2 things. There is localization, meaning at the grassroots, but there is localization talking about an African context. What does it mean in most of the funders' frameworks when they speak about localization in that sense? Because I work for PASGA, the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research. And while we might not be doing a lot of work in the grassroots, we do our work across Africa. In that sense, we are localized. But how that mean, correspond to the ideas that have been raised here with localization? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to the other questions. I don't know if there was funding related and then the question of localization. It's not posed to anyone specifically. Anyone from the panelists to jump in?
Okay, I'll combine the question on sustainability and length of funding and just talk to what we're doing as Mastercard Foundation. Sustainability is a big issue in development. And in fact, in one of our reviews, we identified sustainability as one of the key aspects. So we look at sustainability, resilience, because we live in a world of multiple shocks now, and then the aspect of equity. When we look at sustainability, we have come up with what we call a portfolio approach to programming. So when we say portfolio approach, we recognize that the issues that are being related, we talk about access to finance, for example. When we talk about access to finance, it's not only about working financial service providers and saying you can extend loans or grants to young entrepreneurs, but also there has to be the environment that encourages innovation, an environment that encourages the young woman to go into business. So we bring different players. Some of them also look at issues around policy, some look at mindset, some of the financial service providers. And in the portfolio approach, when we take a big bet, where we say we do multi-year funding, and when it comes to measuring actually on a regular basis, we also look at what's happening in terms of system change. So moving away from project by project funding, what we call portfolio approach, that really supports multiple players, because we appreciate that where we operate, there is different challenges. So access to finance does not necessarily mean working with a particular financial service providers, but we bring other players as well. So we talk about transformed financial inclusion or transformed access to finance that goes beyond your regular transactional aspects that you're saying, are we seeing commercially viable products that local financial service providers will continue offering way beyond the line of the foundation's investments.
Chris?
Yes, I think the question around localization, what do we mean by that? I think for us, it's interesting because we mentioned earlier, we're almost finalizing our new strategy. And our first outcome of the strategy is actually focused on localization, providing support to African organizations. And I think that's in terms of both funding, but also capacity building, that we want to capacitate African organizations, proxy organizations, to improve and expand their operations. Now, that includes growing the pool of organizations. So I think everybody knows if you talk about organizations that work with governments to help them use evidence, you can probably name 5 or 6 in Anglophone Africa that everybody knows, everybody works with. Maybe 2 or 3 in Francophone Africa that everybody works with. And I think one thing that we don't want to do is create the same dynamic between these large African organizations that we're seeing, between the global north and global southern organizations, that you could then just create a Brookings that's based out of Kenya, that's working in all of Africa and there's nobody else. So it's also for us, for the next several years, is looking to serve as smaller, less well-known organizations that may not be as sophisticated as the usual suspects that everybody works with. And then bringing those up, building their capacity, providing resources to them so that we diversify the pool of organizations that are working with governments and providing different forms of evidence to governments. So I think that's a big priority for us, and it's an outcome within our new strategy. And then to the point, I think from the question from Dale around the length of these grants, being 2 years, 3 years. I think more so than a specific grant, for us it's a commitment to longer-term partnerships with our grantees. Yes, the grant might be for 3 years, but I think once you enter into a partnership with Hewlett, you're going to be in the portfolio for some time. Now, I can understand why a 5-year grant gives peace of mind if you're a leader running an organization. But I've also worked for bilateral before, where we actually signed 5-year contracts that were very rigid. And if everything changes, COVID happens, you can't adapt very easily. You can't change, you can't move money between budget line items. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing either. I think it's the commitment to working with our partners for a long term, being flexible, allowing our partners to define what those priorities are that they work on, that sort of offsets these these shorter term grants that we provide. Because there's always a guarantee, unless something happens, that you get your next grant, and you get your next grant after that. And we have to exit from the partnership that will do that responsibly. We won't tell you today that this is your last grant and the grant ends tomorrow. Like, you have at least a year in advance. And if we can't do that, provide you with funding, some runway for you to be able to figure out, maybe fundraise and connect you to other people so that you can actually get the support that you need.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to just come on this side here before we come back to the panelists. So there was 2 questions here. Sorry, the gentleman here, and I think Edward there. Can we get the mic to him? I also know that this question, the deeper one on localization, if we can maybe take the panelists on during lunch and tea time, we can start the discussion. Over to you.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Sydney Sproul. I'm the Senior Strategy Officer at the Uganda National Academy of Sciences. Just one comment and a question, but was just a very interesting thing that I kept hearing was this global north, global south, which somehow sort of implies some sort of directionality. And an example of this is a time where I was talking to a colleague from outside, and they mentioned reverse innovations in Great Britain. What they were saying was they were taking things that were innovations made in Africa, and they applied them in the United Kingdom. And somehow this was a reverse innovation. And I was given a sort of a different way of thinking about this by a wonderful Jewish professor named Judy Lasker, who said we should probably think about this less about global north, global south, but perhaps global minority and the global majority, where the global minority is actually all of those which are in the global north. The second question I wanted to ask was, there's a lot of emphasis, and I keep hearing of this, and forgive me because I'm not an evaluator. Why do we keep talking about impact evaluations when it seems like in many ways we're talking about very, very messy and systemic issues, where the outcome is not always going to be very straightforward? You know, we keep talking about policies as the outcome or the impact that we want to see. We want to see a policymaker to change their practice, their ways of being. But at the same time, we keep saying, but this is really messy. They have so many different priorities. They have voters, constituents to consider. They may think of things one day and change their mind the next. And so there are, though, from what I've heard, a lot of different types of evaluations, such as a developmental evaluation, which tries to focus and interrogate this idea of how do we get to just ways in which we've changed the systems so that we then do have an environment in which impacts can be created. But I keep hearing from funders, impact, impact, impact. And I'm sort of kind of going, but isn't that a contradiction in terms? Because on the one hand, you want to change the system and the culture, but at the same time, you still are beholden, or at least it sounds like you're beholden to these sort of linear and discrete indicators. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question there, and then come back to the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Benson, and from Kenya. I work for Triple Lane, one of the former Young Impact from Mastercard Foundation. So I'm passionate about localization. So I have three things to challenge the Pan-African. One is about the resources. Two, articulating our own context. Number three is ability to solve our problem. So we cannot run out of the evaluation if we have not done the three circle: the resources, articulation of our own context, and ability to solve our problem. So we cannot shift power. And just as my friend said, the northern global are so powerful than the southern. Why? They have good technology, resources, and a lot of empowerment. So we will remain under the aid of localization if we have not articulated three key things. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I had the hand up there. That would be the last question, and then apologies to the panelists. Over to you after.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question, but more of a comment. My name is Fréjus Toto. I'm the Executive Director of the African Center for Equitable Development. We are working on evidence, policy, and action across Francophone West Africa. As I hear panelists and all colleagues talking about localization, I really want us to start thinking beyond just transferring more funds and capacity from, the global north to proximate or to local organizations, and start thinking about, when we talk about localization, we should also be aware of the need to make sure that those local organizations are really working on local issues, are really embedded into local content. Because you can have an organization which is based in Nairobi, which could definitely be called as a local organization, having all the staff being Kenyan, so we assume that they are closer to the issues. But in reality, maybe they are very far from the issues because they are not that close to the communities or to the problems that they are supposed to solve. So when we talk about localization, we should also be thinking about how we conceptualize that localization so that in the end, the metric that we look will not be how much do we transfer from funders to those proximate or local organizations, but how much do we now shift the power and make sure that those organizations are working on local problems and with local content. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to go over to Andrea to see whether she wanted to comment or answer any of those questions.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I hope you heard the questions.
Yes, thanks. Well, I think I would just maybe react to the last comment that Fred just brought in, to totally agree with him on this, that it is about like setting the agenda that is one of the most important calls, I think, for organizations in the Global South when it comes to localization. So beyond the funds, which are necessary, but not always the only need. So I think from us in Southern Voice, we see the opportunity of generating those spaces between think tanks and research organizations in the Global South to think through the issues that concern them, their priorities, and be able to position them more globally. And I think this goes in hand with the comments we've also heard in the panel before about the importance of having organizations that are locally grounded in issues, but that compete globally. And I think that's the other thing that I think is really important in terms of the administrative capacity, the capacity to speak and engage with peers worldwide in other regions in the global north and so on. So I think that's really important in terms of the localization agenda moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Andres. Morris, did you want to comment on any of the questions, and then we'll come back?
Yeah, just a quick one and around catching on the last one around localization and my experience of what we've been able to do around even localizing ourselves as well. We deliver through partnerships, and one of the key things that we have tried to do is bring in those partners that we are working with, and most of them are grassroots kind of organizations, to co-create with them, to think through with them, to identify their capacity needs as well, and to then to grow them. And we believe by doing so, we also try to entrench localization within the aspect, other than with the national organizations that are strong, getting the funding, and then the grassroots that are actually doing the service delivery on the ground, or they're implementing, then having no kind of ideas and capacity development from their end. The other one that I want to touch base is around the long-term funding and the aspect of the change that we want to see, and sometimes I see a bit of tension when you are developing these calls for proposals, or when you are responding to requests or something like that, whereby we as organizations sometimes we overpromise because we need the money. We need the money, so we overpromise. But when it comes to delivery, then it becomes a little bit problem. I think it's also for us to be able to sit at that negotiating table with the funders and tell them, we see this is feasible. Let's begin from this point, and then progressively we grow together towards creating the kind of impact that we want to create. Otherwise, we are setting ourselves from failure at the beginning, and we end up blaming someone else. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we have less than 5 minutes. Is that correct? No more questions. Okay. Bertie, do you want to go? I thought we could do a quick round of just closing statements with the panelists, and maybe you can just do a quick reflection on what do you think you would need from the other person. So I think that we wanted to still explore. Actually wanted to hear about the impact question, but we will take that forward. A quick round of just closing statements. Maybe I can start on my right-hand side, Morris, Chris, Sijelu, and then we'll close with Andrea.
Thank you, and it's an interesting discussion, and thanks for the opportunity and the listeners. I think my reflection possibly concluding on that is the need for a level playing ground, whereby we can be able to engage as peers, where we can be able to share in a very open-minded kind of discussion on how we can better localize and set the agenda for institutions that are working within the context that we are in. And I think that is also tied with kind of the preconditions that come in on the table when we are discussing this. But then I would say I think the shift is good, the discussions are good, and while we know it takes time to be able to do things, and it is a moment for us to sit down back and reflect and see what is good for the local organization, for the international organization, for the funders, so that we come to the table when we have a kind of a mutual understanding and respect and value for one another. Thank you.
Yeah, I think very quickly, we as a foundation, we're very committed to working in a dignified way, dignifying our partners, both the think tanks we work with, but also our government partners. Now, we don't have all the answers at all. I think we have good intentions. We want to be as respectful as we can to minimize the burden on our partners, transfer as much agency as we can to our partners. We're a learning foundation. We have perspectives. we have a perspective, and we want to be thought partners to the organizations that we work with. And so we're looking forward to learning from the field, the people who do the hard work. It's not us. I think what we have is we have a checkbook that our president writes to organizations, and that's powerful, but it's actually, we're not the ones that are doing the hard work. I think you all are the ones that are doing the hard work. I would like to see as many organizations get involved in supporting governments to make better decisions, from sort of the bigger Nairobi-based entities to the Nakuru-based entities that are working more local and sort of have the understanding of the local context within that, that we have that diversity. And I think if we do that, then that will be success for us.
Yeah, maybe just pick this from where Chris left, from a foundation perspective. Number one, we are committed to the localization agenda. A very difficult discussion, but we're committed to that. And yeah, an invitation as well. As a foundation, we have plans for the next few years. One is around building indigenous evaluation, reaching out to different people across the continent. We have a big initiative coming up, as well as investing in the young women and men. We just heard from a young impact associate who's been working with at the foundation, so inviting other actors as well, funders, to say, yeah, join us in this journey. I heard a proverb yesterday that one stick just smokes, doesn't burn, so really bring all the sticks. Let's move forward with the localization agenda. Thank you.
Andrea, just your closing on your side.
Thank you. I think for us from Southern Voice, we are at the time of trying to start testing some new things. So we are really eager to find partners, organizations that are in the same space of trying to do things differently in practice, so that there is that opportunity to learn. But then we need to take that step forward. So organizations that are, are already thinking about this, are already thinking about how to position themselves differently, how to create these agendas that are grounded in local contexts, how to find new types of funding mechanisms and partnerships across the Global South that allows us to work together in different ways. So I think we are at that stage, and it would be great to connect with other organizations that are in that phase of testing the waters and trying new things. I think there is some appetite from some donors, so I think we can use that as a window of opportunity to test and learn and keep moving forward. Because I think in addition to all the things that we've discussed, there's also we need to learn about the limitations and the restrictions within our own contexts, legal, administrative, taxation-wise, all these things, to actually make the bulk of funds being able to be managed from the Global South. So there's a lot of space to learn, and we are really looking forward to the opportunities to test to get that learning happening. Thanks.
Thank you so much. What we can see is the learning never ends, and I think from Africa Evidence Network perspective, you can see a lot of horizontal relationships, but also the vertical relationships, and we've seen the ones coming between government as well as the many different initiatives. I think that this is where I want to hand over back to Berta to say that we do want to be able to deepen these discussions and come up with some way of moving forward, noting that so much has been happening. Over to you, Berta.
Right. Thank you to the panel, first of all. It's been really insightful and engaging, and thank you to the audience. It seems like there is appetite to continue this discussion, so I really hope that you will come back and join us in around 25 minutes. The idea is that we'll split into groups. We have several funders in the room, and we're going to try and make sure that they are also distributed between the groups. I think that it's clear from the discussion that whilst there might be some different perspectives, there are some, I think, core, perhaps, actions and principles that there can be agreement around. And I think a goal so we will be asking you to write down the summary of your discussion, and this will be synthesized, and we'll sort of try and come up with a short list of actions that perhaps we'll ask people to also agree to publicly. And if we are many organizations that are behind some core principles, then we're stronger. So hoping to see you all back together after a bit of coffee.
Go behave. Finished only 5 minutes late. Everyone.